menu section called the Initiatives section. Please take a look at that and see some of those global actions. It doesn't mean that these will be the only initiatives or actions that can be taken to support the recommendations. We will also be inviting you all, in terms of your own national responses, to share with us what you have done at national levels as well, as we start documenting the achievements of the coalition over the coming months. But the initiatives page on the coalition's website focuses on global or international activities that can be done multilaterally through international organizations. When choosing one of those initiatives, you will see a description, background, and at the very bottom, once again, you will see the contact information. We encourage you to email those individuals listed under contact and let them know if you're interested in participating in any of those activities. So every initiative has its own contact information. Please review those initiatives and contact those individuals. That's all I want to share for today because we have a lot to discuss. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to turn it over to our co-chairs, William Kimball from the United States and Yao Konku Ronsard Kuma from Cote d'Ivoire. Thank you so much. And I think Mr. Ronsard might not be on, but I see Mr. Kimball in the list here. Will, are you with us?
And Will, you're muted. Can you please unmute and go ahead?
And I see Yao as well. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. We're having a little bit of problem connecting again. So we're not hearing everyone's comments. Just kind of wanted to start off with the sub-working group 1 recommendations. And number 1 is what we really refer to as know your customer rules and regulations for companies that are producing chemicals. We've worked a lot in this space, and we really want to just engage the chemical companies and other relevant industries in chemical manufacturing and trading companies to promote cooperation on a voluntary basis with industry and trade to address diversion of chemicals. And I think it's also one of the things that I think we should really look at too is providing these companies with a list of common chemicals that are used in the synthetic drug manufacturing process, and to kind of flag when they see multiple chemicals that have dual use being purchased, but when added together, they can become a precursor or synthetic drug. So we're really looking at diversion of chemicals, precursor chemicals, and related manufacturing equipment. And this would include pill presses and dyes to help criminal organizations actually manufacture fake pharmaceuticals that can be sold on the black market. The number 2, we want to improve identification and detection of synthetic drugs, including their precursors through capacity building for laboratory and law enforcement personnel, in particular designer precursors, through better equipment and awareness for raising law enforcement and the judicial process. I think that's also important when we start looking at the way synthetics are being transferred across the globe very quickly, and a lot of them are being labeled as something other than what they are, and they're going through customs processes, and it reflects that they're one type of chemical and they're actually something different. Number 3 is improve investigation and dismantling of clandestine laboratories through development of appropriate framework, training, and technical assistance for law enforcement, forensic laboratories, prosecutors, and judges. And that's another big thing that from the United States side, we didn't know we had a fentanyl problem because we weren't testing for it. We were testing for other substances, and one of the things that we think that's a critical time for all countries is when you start seeing poisoning deaths from drugs and that type of thing, to test for fentanyl and to actually find the causation of the death, because it'll give you a kind of a better roadmap of what's going on in your country and where the problem is starting. It kind of got away from the United States with fentanyl. We were several years into it before we really realized how big the problem was. And number 4 is increased disposal or repurposing of precursor chemicals and synthetic drugs by adopting national disposal plans and delivering training and technical assistance to national authorities. This is also increasingly difficult for countries to manage. Is when you seize the chemicals, what do you do with them? And then providing your teams and your investigators with proper equipment so they're safe when handling these dangerous chemicals, and then the proper way to destroy them or repurpose them on the market. So that was kind of the first 4 recommendations that we had in our meetings and in our back and forth commentary. Some other things that we've talked about and recommendations is expanding naloxone availability and access globally. And that includes training for all first responders involved in dismantling clandestine laboratories and investigating chemical cases. Also expand the scheduling to address designer drug precursors, substances which are purpose-made to circumvent the list of controlled substances and have no legal use. Again, this is another common problem that we see when we have chemical companies that are shipping their chemicals under mislabeled purposes, and it ends up going across the globe, and no one's really paying attention what it really is. And then the last one, the recommendation was exploring the possibility of establishing a counter illicit drug manufacturing action task force focused on preventing the diversion of chemicals and manufacturing equipment. We have in the Drug Enforcement Administration, we have several different touch points that would serve as a platform for this. And the first one would be our Special Operations Division, and we share intelligence globally with our partners. And that's kind of the summary of our working group 1's recommendations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kimball. I'm going to see if Mr. Yao is on from Cote d'Ivoire, Secretary General of CILAD, if he wants to say a few words. I saw him connecting a few minutes ago, but he may still be working on that. So if not, I will turn it over to the co-chairs of Subworking Group 1.1 also for their review and sharing with us how the past 6 months have gone. We have from South Africa, Henning Root, and from EMCDDA, Andrew Cunningham. So over to you, colleagues, for your reviews and comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brian. Actually, I'm presenting on my own today because unfortunately the co-chair, Henning, he's involved in another activity, so he won't be able to be present with us today. So to give a little resume of what we've been discussing in subgroup 1.1, which is obviously about the manufacture of synthetic drugs and their precursors. I've got 10 minutes and I hope I can squeeze it in. I think the previous speaker did me a favor by reciting some of the recommendations, so that will save me some time at the end. But if I can just do a quick recap then. So during our meetings of subgroup 1.1, we really attempted to try and understand the challenges of illicit manufacture of synthetic drugs and the precursors, and the responses that are in place either at global level or regionally or even nationally to address the particular challenges. So many of those efforts focused on the importance of international cooperation and enhancing the capabilities of forensic personnel and frontline officers to detect, identify, and intercept drug precursors, designer precursors, and synthetic drugs, and strengthen the capacity of law enforcement and customs officers to safely handle and manage those synthetic drugs and chemicals. There was a presentation that was provided, and maybe the slides could be shared because it gives a list of the topics that we discussed during our meetings, which helps a little bit for the background of this. It was circulated by Sarah yesterday, but I don't know if it's possible to put that on the screen just now.
Yes, I'm pulling it up right now.
Thanks, Sarah. So since October, we had a broad range of presenters during our subgroup meetings. Maybe the previous slide, slide 2. Yeah, exactly. So since October, we had a broad range of presenters during our subgroup meetings, including the US DEA, highlighting the importance of understanding what's going on in the synthetic drug market, and in particular how the forensic profiling of seized drugs can provide information about the drug precursors used and the synthesis methods. And that really provides crucial tactical and strategic information to investigators and for policy responses. And we also heard about the work of the Colombo Plan and their program to identify toxic adulterants in synthetic drug mixtures to get a better understanding of drug epidemics and inform responses as well. Now, throughout the process, the colleagues from UNODC have been extremely helpful during the meetings, describing the tools and services available at global level to assist the member states in understanding and responding to the manufacture of synthetic drugs and emerging synthetic drug threats, especially through the early warning advisory. They also provided details of the tools and services for building capacity of national forensic laboratories, including the UNODC's guidelines that aim to improve quality standards on drug identification, chemical disposal, crime scene investigation, and many, many more. In the December meeting, we talked a lot about production and the challenges of dismantling illicit synthetic drug laboratories. This included a presentation of the UNODC's STAND program for the safe management and disposal of seized drugs and chemical precursors. And we heard about 2 initiatives focused on training on dismantling illicit laboratories for law enforcement. The first was the Colombo Plans training, and secondly, the European Union approach and the resources of CEPOL, the European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Training. In January, we focused largely on control measures and international scheduling. We heard from the INCB about their activities, such as strengthening in national legislation, cooperation with the industry, the international legal framework, international scheduling, cooperation, exchange of information, and intelligence. And we also heard about the work of CCAD OAS on their activities to promote the control of synthetic drugs and precursors in their member countries. And at our last meeting just 2 weeks ago, we took a close look at the INCB's tools for precursor chemicals and equipment control. And we had a very, very clear explanation of PEN Online, which is the pre-export notification system for monitoring international legitimate trade in precursor chemicals, and PICS, the Precursor Incident Communication System, which is the tool for sharing actionable information and intelligence. Their presentation also included PEN Online Lite, where information can be shared about the export of chemicals which are not included in Tables 1 and 2 of the 1988 Convention. And I think the group agreed that it's absolutely essential to make use of all these tools and to have both the illicit trade and trafficking information exchange at the global level if we are to have any impact on synthetic drug manufacture. So if you could move to the next slide, we can see the recommendations that were already mentioned by Will, which are on the screen now with some suggested amendments that are there in red. And on the next slide, the additional recommendations which were also mentioned by Will. And as well as these, I think it's important to reinforce the use of the existing INCB tools just mentioned by perhaps even including a further recommendation. For example, something like to enhance investigations into suspicious and stop shipments, diversion attempts, and trafficking incidents, by increasing the exchange of actionable information and operational cooperation through existing online platforms. Because while these platforms are already available and many countries have access to them, I think there's probably some scope for improving the implementation and use of those platforms at a global level. So In the sub-working groups, I think it's fair to say we didn't have that much time for discussion because we were always quite pressed. But it's good that we're here today to discuss these recommendations, and hopefully we can exchange some more information, as we heard earlier from Brian, to have the opportunity again in April to discuss these in more detail might be quite opportune for certainly subgroup 1.1. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that summary of a very rich set of meetings and content over the past several months. Now we have if you all check out the chat feature, you'll see that the agenda has been posted there. We have a few minutes for discussion. So I will turn it back to our co-chair, Mr. Kimball, if he wants to moderate and call on any of the colleagues here on the line. Following this discussion, which we will try to keep to about 10 minutes, we'd like to move on to subworking group 1.2 so we can hear from the co-chairs of that subworking group and also to receive comments. So I'll turn it back to Mr. Kimball, and we can look at hear from the colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. As I'm kind of reading through the comments now, does anyone have any questions that they would like to start with? I don't think that we have any questions ongoing. Is there anyone that would like to provide a comment or any further framing for this meeting?
Mr. Chair, if I could take a comment on that.
Sure.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Warm greetings from Poland. My name is Michał Aleksandrowicz. I have this privilege also to be the co-chair of the subworking group 1.2. But despite of the fact that we are taking care of the trafficking of synthetic drugs, I also would like to touch the issue of illicit drug production, which is still a main part of our work as law enforcement officers. Regarding the issue of production, the recommendations which have been presented in here, I would like to promote the approach that we have developed under the Impact NPS synthetic drugs platform, which is the major EU instrument which is taking care of this fight against serious and unorganized drug crime. Currently, we are holding here in Poland a 2-week course for the officers from all the EU member states of the European Union on fighting and neutralizing of clandestine laboratories. And dear colleagues, our training center in Legionowo, which have been developed in the 2011, is open for all the colleagues all over the world. We are providing the trainings to many different law enforcement agencies. So whenever you would like to take part into in one of our courses or organize a dedicated tailored course for you. So please keep in mind that there is a training center in Poland nearby to Warsaw, which is active and would like also to provide you this kind of support whenever it's necessary. So this is one of my points, because we see that there is a still need to train the officers regarding the dismantling and neutralizing of illicit clandestine laboratories. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Mikhail. That's really great information, and that will really help out a large amount of our members from Europe. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll also interrupt to say, when we are in the discussion phase, I've paused the recording, so the discussion will not be recorded, only the presentations from the co-chairs. Thank you.
There was a question from Colleen King about know your customer policies and kind of how that's being framed. If Colleen, would you like to comment on or share the question with everyone else?
Sure, thank you. I was just asking, in the context of know your customer and providing chemical companies this list of common chemicals used to make synthetic drugs, would that be the international special surveillance list, and for the US, the DEA special surveillance list, or would that also include additional information as we're identifying new pathways to making synthetic drugs?
I think it should be all of the above. I think it's the chemical space is so fast, synthetic drug production is so fast that those lists need to be updated frequently. We're finding more and more combinations that are being sold together, and it's a very simple mixing process to make drugs like fentanyl. And I think that we could probably benefit. We'll definitely be able to share our list at DEA, and we would be happy to work with anyone to enhance our list and to provide it to the group.
Thank you.
There's another question about the recommendation for scheduling to address designer precursors. Barbara Rimberg, would you like to make a comment or address the group?
Thank you. And good afternoon or morning, evening, everybody. No, I just wanted to know what sort of the thinking was behind that recommendation. Is that meant to be for governments to do, or is that meant to be internationally, or is it meant to be both? Just anything from your take from these sub-working groups, how this came about and what was meant by that. Thank you.
I think the general consensus from the group that would be done by individual governments and would be looked at as part of our coalition. I think it's going to be hard to do that on an international scale with a lot of the challenges we all face. So I think that would be a recommendation based on what synthetic drugs are prevalent in your country, and what we can do and what we can all do together to stop the flow. Does anyone else have a comment?
Yes, Will, I see a hand up from Paolo S.A. Taksud. If you want to jump in, Paolo, and then after that, we'll hop over to Omer. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Cher. Indeed, my name is Paul West, and I work for the European Commission in DG Taksud, on drug precursors. And I really am very grateful to see that now on the recommendations, we already have something very important, which are designer precursors. So it's really a big issue for us in the EU. The illicit manufacture of synthetic drugs in the EU is based or is using around 95% of designer precursors in their manufacture. So it's really a big thing for us in the EU, and we think it's really a very good opportunity that we have now 149 countries, if I saw it correctly initially today. We have a big coalition designer precursor foundation. I think the idea is to explore different ways to tackle the issue of designer precursors, not only at national level, but now that I'm talking also after Barbara was asking if it will be only about national or also international.
We've looked at conducting global interdiction operations and target illicit manufacturing of synthetic drugs as a whole of nation building approach. That's been discussed quite a bit. We're ready and willing to assist in any way possible to do that. And then support automated website scraping technology to search for the sale of synthetic drug chemicals. That is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge with the encryption that some of the social media platforms are utilizing. We're having a hard time doing that because we're not seeing all the personal chats and the one-to-one chats and the end-to-end encryption. And then some of the recommendations are providing training and resources and sharing intelligence on groups that are using cryptocurrency to purchase chemicals. We find that's very, very prevalent in our investigations. We see that more and more. We see that as a common way of paying for chemicals. And it's also, it's very hard to trace and find out who's receiving and who's actually purchasing. And so that's something else that we've looked at and we want to talk about is how do we share intelligence on that front? And really, it's just how can we all work together to build capacity and provide training and resources for each other. And that's kind of that's a report from 1.2. And there's a lot of very, very difficult discussions going on in this space. So I would just, anything that we can do from the Drug Enforcement Administration, we will be willing to work with any of our partners. We have a global presence, and we will always be there to assist, especially in the long-term investigations and global interdiction. And I'll pass it back to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kimball. Now I will invite our co-chairs from subworking group 1.2, trafficking of synthetic drugs, Michael Aleksandrowicz from Poland and George Pasiaskos from the United States to share their comments and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. We have already discussed with George how we should proceed, and I will start with a brief explanation. This what we have done, what we have discussed during the last couple of months, because today, this is March. However, we had hold the meetings since November last year. We had this chance, thanks to this initiative, to discuss various topics during this couple of months. At first, we have started the discussion in relation to the border security management, because this is something which is really important when we speak about blocking of the trafficking of synthetic drugs and PSs, but also precursors which are used for the production of the synthetic drugs and other substances. I think that very important thing was also the topic of the essential chemicals, which I think is also quite emerging trend when we also face it in the European Union, when we speak about the free movement of the goods. And with this movement of the goods, we also see that a large loads of the essential chemicals, legal substances, are going across the EU, also for the purpose of the illicit production of synthetic drugs. So this is one of the part of the border management, and we need still to work about that. In November, we have also discussed the concealment and methods of trafficking. Maybe when we speak about the synthetic drugs, they are very often mislabeled as well as the precursors. So we have to be very careful when we do the controls, when these goods are coming through the border, because sometimes also the time for the possible control is quite limited. So these were the topics which we discussed in November. In December, we have focused on testimonies of the officers who conduct different kind of the cross-border operations, those especially which have been targeting the synthetic drugs. We have heard a very good presentation about the Operation Azure, which provided us very good examples of this, what can be done on the global level, because this is the scope of the work which we have under our coalition. This, what is the crucial point, is also the preparation and development of the infrastructure which support day-to-day work of the police officers, of the border guards officers, customs, and all the relevant agencies, which facilitate their work in fight against the synthetic drugs trafficking. In January, we put a lot of attention on the cooperation with the private sector. This is very important topic from the perspective of this private partnership cooperation, which is in the current era, in the era of globalization, is also one of the part of our daily work. And when we speak about the synthetic drugs, we see now that the majority of the drugs trafficking is taking part with the illicit use of the postal and courier services, which is a big complication for the law enforcement officers, because when you could calculate the numbers, the high extreme numbers of the postal packages, courier packages, which are going on every single day throughout the whole world, these numbers are outrageous. It's even hard to calculate how many of these packages are going through the postal system every day. And when you think about the law enforcement, you have to think about the capacity of making the checks. I have to say that from our European perspective, Today, I have already mentioned the MPAC NPS synthetic drug platform because we also do this kind of cooperation within the European Union. We cooperate a lot with the global players, global companies, which provide the services, postal services and courier services. And despite of the exchange of the information expertise, we also organize the trainings with support of these companies, even if at their premises. So I think that this is also a very nice example, which could be incorporated later on during the work of the coalition. The last meeting that we hold in the February was the meeting which was very relevant for us because we have also learned a lot regarding the trafficking of synthetic drugs via the aviation, different kind of means of aviation transport. We had got the guests from the ECAO, which have explained to us what are the tasks, what are the vulnerabilities also, in this case, especially of the general aviation, of the small aviation airports. And in the end, the colleagues from the Homeland Security Investigations provided us very good overview on the basis of the two operations which they have presented. It was Operation Hydra and Pelican Bones, and the colleagues have presented how it can be done. What is the way? What was their approach? What was the experiences? What was the added value? What was the problematic? What was the challenge? And I think that it was a very comprehensive picture that we had during this last couple of months, because all these meetings from November till December, January, and February, they gave us very good picture of that. What are the areas in which we need to, how to say it, polish or enhance our cooperation if we speak about the law enforcement activities, starting from this operational, strategic, but also forensic, also preparatory, going through the cooperation of with the private companies. So this in general were the topics which we have discussed during the last 4 months. And now I would like to give the floor to my fellow colleague, George Pasiaskos from the US HSI, who will follow with the recommendations which we have worked out during the last couple of months. So George, if you could please replace me in the co-chairing and follow with the results of our joint work.
Thank you, Michael. Again, my name is George Pasiakos. I'm with Customs and Border Protection, the Assistant Director of Field Operations in New York. I think want to kind of just go over the recommendations and how the meetings kind of fell into some of these recommendations. I think recommendation number 5, conduct reoccurring global interdiction, and I think Michael touched on it. I think Mr. Kimball touched on it. I think all the presentations showed us pockets of excellence, but what it really showed us is that we need to coordinate more. There's a lot of good work going on in pockets of the world, different operations, but everybody's got their own threats. You know, with the US, we see fentanyl as being a huge threat, and some other countries now experiencing that. Methamphetamines in other parts of the world, not that methamphetamines aren't a big threat in the US either, but what we see is different aspects of the threat. Some are more supply chain oriented, some are more interdiction oriented, and some are more transshipment oriented. So I think some of the initiatives that have been put forward that are behind some of these recommendations, some of the training programs on intelligence are well founded as far as, you know, creating the common threat picture, having and conducting these reoccurring global interdictions, and really bringing people together and coordinating the efforts instead of just reacting to our own little efforts. I think that's going to go a long way. And again, just, you know, those reoccurring effects. You know, moving on to number 6, and supporting the automated website screening technology. I think this is, you know, one of a lot of technological solutions that were discussed. I think there's an initiative on there on surface web training out of INCB, yeah. And, you know, just one of many tools. There's emerging artificial intelligence technology out there. that are being used to look at supply chains, to look at how certain companies sell pill presses, transship them through Thailand and different areas like that, and a lot of these tools that can be used to help countries target that sort of thing. So again, just one of many technological solutions that were discussed, and as part of the supply chain, I think is where that fits in. And recommendation number 7, again, another huge growing area mentioned by Mr. Kimball earlier. I think crypto now touches just about everything we touch. It helps layer and obscure a lot of the money transactions from these organizations. And so I think the more training law enforcement receives in this, and I know we're started with a lot of different companies that are doing this type of training. I could think of chain analysis here in the United States, and TRM is another one that we use locally. But this is not going away. It's a growing industry, and the more we train and get law enforcement familiar with these payment providers and cryptocurrencies, I think the better off our workforces are going to be. And finally, number 8, conduct building capacity. And I think another thing that was shown through the meetings was that we're all at different stages of development in this fight. And so, and a lot of it, the private industry is behind in certain ways. There's some legislation that's needed in many countries, including the United States. And so the strengthening of the public-private partnerships is really something we need. And I think that's another initiative that INCB is promoting through the Strengthened Public Partnerships Industry Cooperation to combat the diversion of chemicals. And I know that's still an ongoing issue with the different types of chemicals that are listed differently. And then again, using the mail and the laws of public privacy and all that with different countries, with even within the mail environment, and sharing information is something that we have to get going. As far as the capacity of even the mail environment, we still only receive about 10% of advanced information in the mail environment, and that's in the United States. That's 90% of what's coming through the mail is just volume of unknown coming at you every day. And so again, the general feeling on the discussion on the meetings, they were well planned out, really framed some of the issues out there. One issue that didn't come up in the recommendations was the canine program, I think, was used, and some of the interdiction tools that are used at the borders. Again, going back to a little bit of AI as being part of the future of that in a lot of the interdiction tools, and in some of the new canine programs that are coming out with precursor chemical dogs and stuff like that were also discussed. But with that, I'll throw it back to Michael. If you had anything else you wanted to say on the recommendations and your thoughts before we move on.
Sure. I can only agree with George about these recommendations we have discussed today. I would like to especially point out that the issue of the cryptocurrencies. This is something which is quite emerging, but it is maybe it's not on the list of the initiatives which is placed currently on the Globalization website. But in the past, we have also used the courses regarding the tracing and seizure of the cryptocurrencies offered by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. We have also utilized the experts in the training of our officers in Poland, but also for the training of European officers under the projects funded by the European Commission under Internal Security Fund. So this is maybe a hint for the future, possibly. Regarding the capacity building, I think that this is something for what we have to take especially care, because synthetic drugs world is quite complicated. We have got multiple substances which are controlled. They got their own derivatives. They got own precursors, precursors, designer precursors, which is making our life of the officers who are taking care of this kind of the crimes very difficult, because despite of following the criminals, we also have to follow the legislation and also try to find the system which they use, because they try to find the loopholes in the system on the global level. Criminals will always utilize the legislation in the country, which is vulnerable in the perspective of the synthetic drugs. If, for example, countries do not have the generic legislation regarding the synthetic drugs, and the updating of the list of the controlled substances is taking a much more time, they will illicitly using this country, for example, for the production purposes, because they are already aware that in this case they will not be prosecuted for this crime, which is currently not a crime if it's this particular substance is not controlled. Regarding other recommendations, I have to say that the global interdictions, this is something which is very important from our perspective. We also support this kind of the operations. We also have got the capacity to do it as an impact. I will still promote this European Union initiative. But this, what is important at most, is that we have to all do this all together, because then it really makes sense. So this is just a final word from my side. George, maybe you would like to add something, or Mr. Kimball, if you would like to conclude on that in general.
Mikhail and George, that was really excellent. You guys have done a lot of good work in that space, and it's clear that you've pointed out some really challenging items that we're all facing. So really, thank you for your work on that. Brian, I know we're kind of running out of time. Do you want to have a couple questions and comment section before we pass on?
Yes, that would be wonderful. I'm going to pause the recording if we could have the any comments or questions and see how much we can do. If there are a lot of comments and questions, we can continue in the April session, but let's see if we can get through some of those now. Thank you.
We have one question. It's from recommendation 1. Recommendation 1, could we clarify that the intent is to engage with domestic chemical industries? Yes, I think that's a crucial step for each country. We host working groups quite frequently when we talk about know your customer regulations and kind of best practices. And also we provide a list of chemicals that when purchased together is kind of like a red flag for the companies to report maybe suspicious behavior. Does anyone else have anything to add on that? George, do you have anything?
Sorry, the recommendation, engage chemical and other relevant industries and key chemical manufacturing trading countries to promote cooperation. No, I got nothing on that.
Okay. And I think that's I think it's very important for each country to engage their local manufacturing and import, people who import chemicals frequently, to look for those type of chemicals and to provide tips and leads when necessary. Do we have any other questions?
See a hand raised by Asma Fakhri.
And Asma, I see that you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Can you please try a different microphone or try to talk to us again? No, it's very distant, Asma. Can you speak much closer to the microphone, Thank you.
Sure. Is this better by any chance?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead, please.
Perfect. Thank you. I was just saying, in the same vein of the discussions and the comments and questions that are being made regarding public-private partnerships and some discussions that had come up in 1.1, there is also a module of the UN Toolkit on Synthetic Drugs that looks specifically on guiding on how to set up public-private partnerships. that involves very critical resources from the International Narcotics Control Board, from the World Bank, from UNODC, and other UN entities that can help to clarify, highlight the importance of, and also guide through the process of establishing these private-public partnerships. So this was presented on, in I believe, sub-working groups 1.1 in the February session, and as well as in sub-working group 2.2. Thank you.
And I see Antonio Mazzatelli also raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. And just trying to complement what has been already said regarding engaging the industry. In INCB, we have published already a number of guidelines as well as a collection of best practices. And we are implementing a very, we think, important initiative. When we talk of industry, the first step would be identifying at national level which industry, which industrial sectors might be subject to the infiltration of drug traffickers, of illicit drug manufacturers. So we are already starting to develop a methodology which we are trying to test in several countries. And definitely more we look at the designer precursor, more we look at the evolution of illicit drug manufacturing and the different methodology criminal entrepreneurs use in order to recover the chemical substances they need for manufacturing illicit drug, more we realize that we need necessarily to involve the industry. Clearly, there is no one-size-fitting-all countries. Each country has its own industrial setting. So at the very end, trying to develop a recommendation, try to develop good practices, trying to make the industries owning this effort would be of paramount importance.
Thank you. And at this time, we do need to move on to the next session, but I want to thank our co-chairs for today for leading the session and for all of you in participating. There may still be some interest in sharing comments on recommendation 1.2, so we can continue that at the top of the April session. But we will also be posting them, we'll say, in draft form on the website, so that you can also review those and share those with other colleagues as well over the coming weeks. And we'll have some meetings at the CND also to discuss and further receive feedback. So with that, thank you all so much. I'm going to now turn it back to Cyril so we can move on to the next session. Thank you.